So hello, welcome to the W3C call for the 26th of August. The topic of the call is the Dataset Site Specification. It's just the three of us, so it could be a fairly short call, especially since one of the main actions that's comes out of it, I think, is just for me to ask you guys to review the stuff I've written, and I'll send out a call to the community more broadly to do that as well later on. So it might be fairly quick order of business, but we shall see. So let me just share the slides with you. So in fact, the last call that we had was also, which was about 6 weeks ago now, was also devoted to the dataset site specification. So this is the specification for the splash pages that lead to the feeds, that link to the feeds. And also the specification for the data catalogs that allow spiders to locate those splash pages and so on and so forth. There were a couple of actions from that last meeting, which are now done. The main one was actually to provide more guidance and kind of user-friendly text, because the specification as it existed on the 15th of July was really just a bunch of tables of attributes and properties. So there's a little bit more guidance provided. The other thing I've done is we talked in the last call about guidance in the sense of what kind of properties should be considered optional, which should be recommended, which should be required. The consensus was that given that there's a template already provided by our tooling, which satisfies the conditions for you, it does no harm to make more things required or recommended than optional, because essentially it's, you know, if you use our tooling, you get all that stuff for free. So the specification's a little tighter than it was before. So the main point, as I said, is going to be to ask you guys to review the dataset site specification as it exists, and just make any comments you want as issues in the GitHub repo. The slides I've got here are really to just surfacing points that I think might be worth some discussion. But before I continue, any points you'd like to raise, Nick or Chris?
No, I hadn't seen the your latest draft. So,
well, it only went in. It only went in yesterday evening. So yeah, it wouldn't be surprising. Yeah.
Sure, no worries. Well, I can have a quick browse now.
I was just checking I haven't missed anything. Yeah, but all good.
And I don't know if you guys did. Tim, did you see the latest on the schema.org stuff?
I was going to come to that. In fact, that's later on in the slides.
Oh, then excellent. I had nothing else to raise.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It actually, it was funny. It happened live. I was just thinking I should check in on this issue, and as I was watching, suddenly the 10.0 release notes came up on the screen for schema.org, and I thought,
yes.
However, before that, so the main thing that's missing from the redraft or the expansion that I did yesterday is that one of the actions incumbent on me last time was to look at how much structured data should still be considered important, by which I mean having the various data points indicated in attributes on the HTML itself, so microdata, RDFA, that kind of thing. Looking into the matter, so schema.org and Google are both happy to support and to parse microdata and RDFA and that kind of thing. Looking at the Google Notes, however, it says, Google says that they prefer JSON. And the nature of the templates we provide is such that, of course, everything that's in the JSON is also in the HTML. So it made me think it might not be worth specifying microdata type things in the specification itself, if it's given that it's already there in the JSON and already specified for the JSON. It seems potentially redundant to put that in microdata. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Obviously, people get it free without effort if they use all the templates and so on and so forth. But putting in the specification as a recommendation seemed possibly too strong.
Yeah, I guess the thing we mentioned on the last call was about whether there are other tools, specifically those in the kind of open data community that I can't remember the names of them. There's loads of them, but they are the kind of standard. It's been a while. This the kind of standard open data tooling that parses data sets, the things that power data.gov and things like that. Which I'm going to rapidly try and use the cache of Google to remember the names of.
Yeah, if you could, that would be good, because I sort of raised this generally actually at the ODI, saying what is the general perception of the currency of those kinds of tools? Because I think of it as sort of emerging to a large extent out of semantic web work, and maybe less relevant today than it was 5 or 6 years ago. I think I'd have to say that the response I got was largely, not sure, haven't thought about it for a while.
Yes, well,
Which
this
sort
is
of
the thing.
confirmed that impression for me.
Yeah, I guess this is it, because I'm just looking at data.gov, and they've actually completely rebuilt their website since the last time I looked at it. And as you say, a lot of these things are maybe 5, 6 years old now in terms of the guidance that we're following. Which is it? Well, I suppose the GDS are just redoing everything, aren't they? So that's probably why they've decided to do this one as well. But I would be interested. So DataPress for a long time was a company, a startup. I don't know how they're doing now. That did. They're still going. So they kind of, I think they compete with Sinatra. Is it Sinatra or something like that?
Sinatra sounds familiar.
And that was the big other tool. Let's see.
London Sport on their front page as well. Not very OpenActive.
What's that, sorry?
The front page of DataPress is a London Sport page.
Yes.
Funny given the OpenActive conversation.
I think actually we introduced them to London Sport. That's how that came about. So years ago, they were looking at London Sport. Were looking for a way of publishing their data, and so we introduced them to Tom, because Tom was was a startup in the cohort of startups that was the same as I'm in, which was a startup in the ODI accelerator back 5 years ago, before OpenActive was taken on by the ODI formally. And so there was this is all kind of pre a lot of that stuff.
I see.
When London Sport at that point was a kind of much more involved leader in the OpenActive work, I guess, when previous CEO was around. CKAN, there we go. So CKAN.
Mm-hmm.
That is the name of the open source portal, and that's the big popular one. And they are also the same. I think DataPress is based on CKAN, because CKAN is open source, and CKAN, CKAN, is a competitor to another one, which you can find the name of, which is the one that DataPress is competitor to, but they've got proprietary software.
I think.
Socrata, there we go. It's basically a question of, so for example, there's something called the Leeds Data Mill, which it might still be going, I don't know, which is built in one of these things. And that's kind of collection of open data around, they might have renamed it.
DataPress site.
It's a DataPress site, is it?
I think so. I think I saw them on the DataPress site just now.
Excellent. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? DataPress just goes around with all the customers it's looking for are probably the same as, yeah, it is DataPress. Amazing. They've just cleaned up all the CKAN customers, I'm guessing, with a managed service, which makes sense. So there you go. So that's a good example. So Data Mill North, which is an ODI, what used to be called a node back when there were nodes in the ODI, which is like a local version of an ODI organization. And so they were advertising and promoting data that's around the north apparently now, not just Leeds. And so I suppose it's really how much we want to enable these kind of organizations to promote the data, as well as Google. And I guess it comes down to whether these Socrata and DataPress and CCAN are all using the same JSON LD schema.org stuff, which obviously Google's promoting and Google's using, because it's like almost the entire ecosystem is Google, isn't it? It's schema.org run by Google. Google then using that and pulling into Google search for their dataset search engine. So I guess it's just how much we're supporting the kind of open community outside of Google, doing all of this independently of that.
Well, and I guess the other side is, I mean, I suppose if it's a recommendation rather than a requirement, the burden is notionally zero. But I suppose it's also about, I mean, my impression is that things like microformats never actually attained much currency outside the open data semantic web world. So I think like developer mindshare was always very low. So I'm worried about it being a bit off-putting if you get this wall of stuff about microformats and you've never encountered the term before. You know, is that a barrier, I suppose?
So you're thinking that maybe that could go in like a recommended bucket, so it's not scary somewhere further down the spec, which is like a not, therefore not. Is that what you mean, or are you thinking just kind of bin it completely if no one's using it?
I mean, I'm kind of thinking bin it for the present, and then data.gov.uk is undergoing a reorganization and revival. And I suppose if they come out with recommendations, we should follow those recommendations and so on and so forth. I'm just not clear, given that all the information that would be presented in the structured data markup is also present in the JSON LD, and given that the largest part of the ecosystem prefers it to be in the JSON LD, and given that JSON LD is also parsable by people who are outside of that ecosystem, I'm just not sure what value that kind of microformatty stuff is adding.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess it's a, I don't know if it's worth like is it worth a note or something to reference? I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure out whether, because I guess there's no harm in us keeping it in the dataset site template itself.
Oh yeah, it certainly wouldn't be. I wouldn't forbid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So it's almost then. So that creates some additional accessibility. So it's almost like, is it worth somewhere recognizing that as a maybe it's just a line in the spec then that just says, you know, microformats such as or you could put, well, it depends on like how much you wanted to include it. You could put things like the equivalents of properties. So for example, if we've got a table of, by the way, Tim, I've just been looking for the version that you've published. I don't think it's gone into the CI hasn't picked it up, so it's not being published on GitHub pages.
Oh, okay, that's weird.
Kind of prohibitive for just quickly scan.
I'll have to check it then.
No worries. But yeah, what I can read is a markdown that I can see you've just put in there. Yeah, so you've got properties in the list. So I guess it's a question of whether you could have a properties, you know, you've got a property status type notes, whether there's it's useful to have an equivalence for, you know, the way that in I don't know if you remember looking at this, but in DCAT 2 there's like a little table of equivalents between schema.org and DCAT.
Yeah.
So is it worth us just having like a little cheeky table somewhere in the appendix like they have, which is just like, if you're going to do this, this is our recommended equivalence between, you know, the well-known microdata properties of the previous century or whatever, and the now, just so that people do it consistently, I suppose, if nothing else, right? Like if it's not even a recommendation, it's like they did in DCAT. It's just like,
yeah, okay, that makes sense. I mean, this is exactly it. Is that I wrestled with that yesterday, and when I started putting it into the main table, kind of saying here are the properties that we would recommend you communicate in the human readable part, it started making not an unreadable mess of it, but
yeah,
making it look much more complicated than it has to be.
Right.
Yeah. but yes, I suppose an equivalence table at the end saying, if this is your bag, here's how you go about it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's quite, and actually, yeah, completely agree. That would also really simplify the tables for the average user that's not doing that. So, yeah.
Okay, I think that's a pretty easy resolution. It's a lot of typing, but that was the other thing. It's very annoying to specify in a way, but I can get over that.
What's that? What's annoying? Sorry, the
equivalences.
Oh, right.
And it makes the HTML actually quite. It's kind of funny. It makes the HTML both clearer structurally and more difficult to read. But that's by the by.
But I mean, the equivalence table could literally just be property to property rather than needing to go into the HTML structure of it.
Yeah.
Could just be this property is the same as this other, because it's basically DCAT, I think. Because what we're really saying there is the DCAT properties which we're using in the microdata, which is DCAT, are equivalent to these properties in the JSON.
Yeah.
So it's probably quite similar to in fact, because our stuff is inherited from schema, it's almost exactly the V2 table.
Yeah.
Schema.org, which is our plus some additional properties we've added to DCAT. But I guess it's doing it. Yeah, and I guess you could even do it to DCAT V2, given that that's. I mean, although a lot of it I think would probably still be DCAT V1, but you're basically, because the problem with that mapping in the DCAT V2 spec is it predates the additions we're adding now for WebAPI stuff. So having the same in our spec would be quite a good one, and also quite nice that we can point people to it and say, hey, we've got a mapping here if DCAT people are thinking about it.
Yeah, and I guess that's nice because it does make more explicit the link as well, because it's detectable in the current documentation, but it's not really foregrounded. So I suppose that would at least make the relationship with DCAT clearer if it did nothing else.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's quite a doable action. So the web API endpoint descriptions. Essentially, this is just a more specific request for review. Most of writing the specification, of course, was essentially deriving the specification from the template, but that wasn't true with regard to the web API booking stuff because we don't have that in existence yet. So there's a large section headed worked example in there, which is what the web API endpoint descriptions would look like, were they to exist. So it'd be useful to review that point more specifically. I'll put that in an email after this call, I think, to the, well.
Have you seen there's an example in the issues for the repo, a worked example which includes the API stuff. Did you see that?
I didn't see that. No. Where is that?
I can give you the issue number. It is probably says something like full early release. Yeah, that's the one. Full early release, something or other. Full early release JSON LD example, which is going to be frustrating if you've created that yourself.
So, yeah, well, it wasn't too hard to create, so that's
okay. Sorry about that. It's just doubled the work there, or doubled up. But yeah. So the reason the reason I pointed that is that the access service that references and those properties are all the same properties. Well, mostly with some now differences to the schema.org proposal.
Yeah.
So I think yeah. So if you took access service. I've just realized that I'd be you could go into detail. I think it's landing page is the only one that's changed at the moment. They've gone back and forth on a bunch of things, but it sounds like that's the main one that's reverted to URL instead. Which right. I'll go ahead and update that in the issue because it's quick to do, and that then would match There you go, done that. So that then I think now matches the schema.org RFC thing.
Okay, cool. So coming to that point, yes. So the web API work that we discussed on the last call was slotted to go into the schema.org version 10 release, which I think they're aiming for 7th September. However, looking at the intended changes now, Dan Brickley of schema.org raised a couple of points with regards to the web API pull, as I see Nick is already aware. And it looks like we're missing that release. We're not listed as going into 10.
Yeah.
I guess this raises two questions. The first one is, do we have a preferred resolution for this? It seemed to me, Nick, from watching your correspondence with Dan, that essentially we're all happily aligned with schema.org. There's no tension, particularly with what they want to do. Forms too. So it's just the unfortunate fact that we've missed this release.
Yeah.
But it will still do all the things we need it to do.
Yeah, that sounds like it. And it sounds like it's they're monthly releases. So, and they're already a little late on this one. But if we can get Dan to merge that in at some point in the next kind of 3 weeks, that's probably quite a good indication that he's happy with. And it's amazing, actually. He's only come back with 2 points, really, of feedback, which, and one of those was already a thing that we flagged in a different issue, which was around conforms to being more general, which is great for us because, it makes it even more of a useful property if other parts of schema are going to make it adopt it. So it's really just a semantic question about this endpoint URL.
Yeah.
But which is annoyingly the only real, the thing that the validator has, the test suite has some code that references this stuff, and that's the only property that's referenced, because it's the only important thing to know is what's the actual root of the thing. But interestingly, the clarifications that we've added there. So Tim, I looking at your example, this was the whole debate that we were having in that RFC, because one of the guys from science on schema was talking about using Web API as a replacement for Open API, the kind of the machine readable description format.
The Swagger, what
exactly.
Swagger morphed into, yeah.
Right, Swagger. So, and this was this big debate we had. So actually, this is a really good example, because the usage you've got in here of the is what I think is the consensus, that the preference is, rather than having a web API for every endpoint, which would be kind of mirroring Swagger and almost trying to, it almost would start to bleed into that space, and we're trying to then reproduce what Swagger's already got, is actually all we're doing is having a single web API, which is just the base URL of the API. And that has a conforms to, which is the spec. And then it also has a endpoint description, which is a link to the Swagger document. And in that Swagger document is where you lay out all the various endpoints. Okay. But of course, we can supply a single Swagger document that anyone using the booking API can then reference, because all of those endpoints are standardized. So we could have a single endpoint description URL that we recommend to people.
Okay. I guess the second issue that raises then is just about timing. I mean, it seems like, as you say, schema.org is aiming for a monthly schedule. They seem to be not quite hitting that, but not missing it by much. When do we want to declare the Dataset Site Specification as candidate release? Meaning there has to be a process of review and comments and integration and so on and so forth. Should we aim to get that more or less aligned with schema.org version 11 as far as we can determine? I don't perceive that there's actually any particular urgency about getting this up to candidate release status.
Yeah, I guess the main thing is it's being integrated into all the booking systems that are kind of currently implementing stuff. So It's just about making sure, oh gosh.
Hello? Hello, Nick? You okay?
Sorry, Tim, I got cut off there for 20 seconds.
It's very ominous. Oh gosh, and then silence.
Dun, dun, dun.
It sounded like the beginning of a horror movie or something. Nick, are you there?
Quite a British horror movie. Oh gosh.
Yeah, it's a subdued horror movie, but
A horror movie about manners and potential overstepping social boundaries.
That's incredible. I really appreciate that. So, sorry. I was going to say, yeah. I think if we could align it, that sounds great. Like as an idea, because it sounds like we've got a little bit more. We've got to refine the spec itself a few times to get it to kind of CR stage. Yeah. So, it sounds like this. I mean, between us refining this, and it sounds like he's happy with conforms to. Really, the only thing he's likely to change, which unfortunately is that thing that's embedded in all the implementations, is the endpoint URL. But that's just, I mean, at the end of the day, that's the difference between endpoint.url, which I think is what he's proposing, and endpoint URL. Yeah. So it's not a massive problem.
Okay. And I suppose, I guess the question is, when should the deadline for comments be? Is it realistic to expect people to finish commenting by, say, mid-September?
Yeah, I guess that's, yeah. Well, I mean, is it worth, what are you kind of thinking in terms of process here? I wonder whether it's worth us kind of pinging around the version that we've got. I'm just thinking about how we did it with the booking thing. Like before we get to CR, it's almost making sure that everything's quiet in the issues. Do you know what I mean? Like all the issues. So maybe almost before we label it CR, is there a first phase of just this is the spec. I'm requesting feedback generally with a deadline without it being a CR label, and then.
Oh yeah, sorry. That is the proposal. Yeah, sorry, the word is ambiguous. But yeah, I was thinking leave it as it is right now on 0.1, or we could do 0.2 or something.
Right.
Request feedback. I'm just wondering about what the deadline for that should be, because obviously if I send out a request for feedback right now, it's going to sit in people's inboxes and everyone's going to ignore it.
Yeah, well, I guess it will probably be one of those things where until we get to CR, where a lot of people, well, I don't know. I wonder, yeah, like maybe 2-3 weeks is a good amount of time. I've got time in the next 2 or 3 weeks to go through comments. I guess, are you thinking that we would iterate this kind of quite live, as in if we put some stuff in the issues and then we refine, and then or is it, I guess, what's the cadence in terms of implementing changes from the issues that come up and are agreed?
I think the cadence is pretty rapid in that,
yeah,
most of the tooling is already there, in fact. So I think that, we're not going to, unless something really horrendous came up, we're not going to be making major changes to it, in fact, right?
Yeah.
Most of the rest of it actually is reflected in the schema.org discussion. So again, that's relatively solid. So I would like to move it forward, I think, fairly quickly. And as you say, sort of pretty live, really, that, people sort of interested to make the change. We acknowledge that. It happens on GitHub so everybody can see it. And also I think the circle of people who are going to be interested is pretty small, right? Like you're the most authoritative commentator. There's going to be other implementers who are interested and informed, but probably don't see changes to this as, threatening their, business model or their staff very much.
Yeah, right. Sure. Yeah. Well, so in which case, potentially we could put a deadline in rather than for comments to be complete, but more for a bit like with what Dan did with his kind of version 10 deadline. It's almost like, is this the point where we can draw a CR line? Therefore, do all comments not just need to be made, but also concluded, by X date? So could we get to the point where we've raised all issues, and if we're doing, if it's rapid, raised all issues and hopefully resolved them by like middle of next month, but like maybe the same timeline as the release for schema.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So actually, if it says so, deadline for receiving and for resolving comments 2nd October, that would probably make sense, because I can't imagine the 11 release for schema.org is going to be before that point anyway.
2nd October. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So we can get a lot of this going before that, and then with schema integrate those changes, and then everything should be ready.
Sort of on rails, really. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. It'd be interesting if anyone from schema is going to come across into our repo and start looking at it. I don't know. Interesting. There's a lot of people who, if you saw that stuff in the RFC, just jumped on it randomly and started. As soon as it was going into that version 10, and then there was a deadline, then suddenly everyone had an opinion.
I was surprised there wasn't more, actually. In fact, I suppose we have to be alert for more coming in.
Yeah.
Although Dan, if Dan is satisfied with the review he's done, I'd be surprised if there's much more substantive to come in, but there might be more traffic.
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking as well. But I don't know. What I've tried to do, you probably saw, is push back and just say, great, we'll do that as a separate, PR, because otherwise we're going to be tweaking.
Yeah. Okay.
For a while. So hopefully that's a way of kind of drawing a line under that one, so Dan can review it, and then we're done, and then everything else can just. But yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, cool.
I had a question just about, as with the data specifications, until people start to actually implement / publish against specifications, you can never be quite sure whether they've got some logistical flaws in them that get covered by the real world. I'm just wondering if there's I've been just nosing around the CCAN and stuff while we've been on the call. I wondered if there's a way to test it out in existing tooling to make sure that we haven't spec something that's utter pain to represent if you're using one of these open data tools. And I'm not nearly familiar enough with this to know whether I'm just suggesting something that's busy work, or there's some purpose there.
Yeah, so from what I understand of the tooling, and I know that Open Data Certificates project that the ODI has as well is one of these. There's buttons in CCAN you can press, which basically are, if you click the button and give it the URL, it will suck the metadata in, and then it can index it, so you can then have the categories and the title searchable. So it might be a worthwhile exercise of taking either a dummy or one of the existing dataset sites, if we're not changing very much, and just kind of sticking it into CCAN or another one of these, and just seeing if those sucking it in buttons work.
Yeah, that would make sense. I think nobody on this call is in a position to volunteer to be that site to do the.
Well, actually, Chris of Open Sessions is London Sport, and they obviously have a DataPress instance, which is CCAN within the community. So we could kind of reach out to Chris and see if him or whoever, one of his colleagues, is managing that instance, would be interested to try and. I mean, actually, they've got Open Sessions, which is using the latest template. They've just updated it a kind of week ago or 2 weeks ago. So we could ask them to index their own data, see if they can do it as an exercise. That would at least cover CCAN.
It seems like a really good idea to me.
Okay.
I don't know how we do Socrata, though, because that's a bit more of a kind of high-end government level tool.
It might be something the social prescribing people are interested in.
Right.
And reach out to them.
Yeah, I guess we only need like a couple of links, don't we? And then yeah, I mentioned we can do it ourselves. The ODIs tool, to open data certificates, which I think still uses microdata. So that's it. But yeah, we might keep that in the templates anyway. But that's a good question, actually. Is the test of the current template might not be the right test if we're trying to test that these tools work with just JSON LD. So we might want to create a stripped back version of the dataset site using only JSON LD, and then test that in the DataPress London Sport tool and the ODI certificates tool to make sure that they don't need that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it'd be kind of a useful exercise from the other side as well in gauging how maintained those tools are and how relevant they are, I suppose. Things like DCAT and so on and so forth might not be intelligibly supported in them. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just, what are the concrete actions? So Chris, you're going to experiment with, you're going to reach out to London Sport, or was that something Nick was happy to do?
I think Nick has the connection there. Nick, the other Chris.
Yeah, we can.
I'll talk to the social prescribing people, and then I can also play with the ODI certificates thing. So yeah, I've played with that before, so that's not too good.
Okay, that sounds good. That's the testing bit, yeah.
Okay. Any other business anyone has?
Do you want so in terms of comments on the thing, is it just best to just raise these in GitHub and process them that way? Is that the best thing to do?
I think so. Yeah, that just keeps it public, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, well, the only other question I had was, we had a thing about conformance certificates before, and like referencing features that are implemented in the booking spec. I mean, it was kind of two things. It was conformance to something, something that kind of proved conformance, but it was also a way of saying these are the features that are implemented.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of building on the test framework approach. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So in the issue, in the repository, there is a kind of some very rough kind of attempt at doing some JSON LD thing for a conformance certificate that you could link to, that basically would say that I've certified that this implementation has these features and the tests pass for them. That's basically what it says. I think, whether that, however you run that tool, there might be lots of ways of running it, whether you run it yourself, whether you get it, gold stamped by someone else running it for you, or all the rest of it. So just wonder in terms of integrating that into this, and whether, how that could, I mean, basically I'm just thinking if the features of the booking spec are the main reason to do this, is it, although there could be features of open data too, to be fair, just thinking where this could best live. Like, is this something that maybe should be incorporated into the booking spec, in fact, as an appendix of some sort, or is it something that should live here? Or maybe the structure of it lives here in terms of how you might reference features, and maybe the features themselves are defined in the booking spec. Don't know, or elsewhere.
Yeah, you do want it on the dataset site, don't you? That's an important piece of metadata to have, if there were technical infrastructure to support it. I wonder if that's something for a subsequent release, really, given that it's kind of notional at the moment. I mean, it's well spec'd out, absolutely. But there's not really tooling that supports it as such.
The dataset site, sorry, the test suite does support the does output this stuff. It's just that we haven't formalized the JSON LD for it. But the well, actually, I can see. Let me have a look. I think, yeah, because so the test suite already outputs a certification, which is what's used for, which is what it's kind of running on a CI at the moment against itself.
Sure, but I mean that's only one piece of the puzzle, right? Like as you say, it could be that there's, you know, if it's just open data, for instance, you might want to have some kind of validation for that.
Well, so no, well, sorry, what I more meant was that the specification. So the tooling at the moment supports outputting the certification and the and I'll check if it does the JSON LD. I can't remember because that was kind of just a rough sketch, but it supports that stuff coming out. And so if we add more tests,
sorry, when you say tooling, you mean the test suite, the .NET test suite.
Sorry, I mean no, I'm not the .NET test suite. I mean the test suite, which is the kind of OpenActive Node test suite that does.
Well, okay, right.
All implementations. So obviously the tests the test suite has, well, okay, more correctly, the features. So there's a feature table and the test suite supports certain features. Some of those features are booking features, some of those features are open data features. So obviously the number of features will increase as the test suite is built out. But I suppose as far as a spec goes, those features are just IDs. You know, feature 1, feature 2, feature 3. Whether feature 1 is implemented or not is a Boolean or whatever we decide. And so we could spec the framework, if you like, or the vocabulary for describing which features are implemented and not, without necessarily having all the features implemented.
Sure, and then it's just a list basically in the JSON LD, kind of saying features implemented equals array.
Yes, exactly that. That's it. Yeah. However we decide to do that. So, so if you go to the Dataset API repo and go to the issue number 13, there's a like a features implemented kind of demonstration array there, which kind of shows what that could look like.
I think that this is a matter for a separate call, because this is really about an entire ecosystem. This is really about how the publishing framework as a whole fits together. And it makes sense to try to keep it tight. I mean, we do want the pieces to fit together to join quite cohesively, absolutely. So I would very much like to see that be a good option. I would need to think about the implications a little bit more, I think. It sounds terribly simple, as just outlined. And I suppose it's nice. So even if you were using your own test suite or whatever, you know, here's what you should output and so on and so forth. But I think it's probably too complex to go into. Well, it's too complex for the next 10 minutes of this call anyway. Well, let's maybe take this up in the next call.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Talk about that, yeah.
And actually, it would be good to get the, if that is the subject of the next call, it would be good to get some of the booking people who are interested, especially when they're back from leave. Because I suspect, I can't remember who it was on the last call that said it. I feel like someone said, yes, it would be useful to have the features listed, so that they knew what to expect from booking endpoints. Yeah, so that sounds like it.
Yeah, let's pick this up in the next call then. And maybe if you could raise that as a GitHub issue on the spec, that would be a good place to have that conversation then as well.
Yeah. So the issue exists. It's issue number 13 on the spec.
Oh, so it's on the Dataset Site Specification already.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, great.
Got quite a lot of different bits on there. There's a rough JSON proposal there as well. But yeah, sounds like it. I mean, I guess if we could bat some stuff around on that issue before the next call too, potentially.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it sounds at first blush fairly simple. So I would hope that we could get this through, before the deadline for further comments and so on. But I think it's worth raising, as you say, in a wider forum as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. Chris, anything else from you?
No, nothing from me, thanks.
Okay. I think with that we can sign off then. Thanks for joining, Chris and Nick.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
One more thing. Data catalogs in scope.
Yes, they are. Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Sorry, that was.
Once I kick the cache so that you can actually see this in a more user-friendly form, you'll see that they're dealt with at some length. Yeah.
Excellent. It's all very obvious. Great. Okay. Oh, sorry. I'll stop doing Columbo style. Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, both of you. Okay. Talk to you all later.
Thanks, Tim. Bye now.